What you are seeing now is our world, but it is not as we know it. This is a timeline completely rewritten. A single pivotal event changed everything. On April 30th, 1945, no Soviet flag was raised over the Reichstag in Berlin. Adolf Hitler did not commit suicide, and the Third Reich had never been defeated by the Allied forces. In this universe, humanity's worst nightmares became reality. Nations trembled, borders were redrawn, and the course of history was forever altered. Cities that once fell to Allied liberation remained under German control. Entire populations adapted to new rules, new hierarchies, and new laws dictated by an unstoppable regime. The question that arises is simple yet profound. How could the Axis powers have achieved this unprecedented dominance? The answer begins with a series of carefully timed decisions, bold strategies, and decisive victories that altered the fate of nations. After the rapid defeat of France in the summer of 1940, Germany turned its attention to Britain. Unlike in our timeline, Hitler initiated the attack 3 weeks earlier than historically recorded. The Luftwaffe struck with precision, targeting airfields, radar stations, ports, and supply lines. Britain, still recovering from the evacuation at Dunkirk, was unprepared for the sudden intensity of the assault. The Royal Air Force faced losses that exceeded its ability to recover quickly. British leadership was forced into a corner. Winston Churchill remained steadfast, yet the relentless pressure from the German offensive created a climate of uncertainty. Public morale weakened under repeated air raids and the looming threat of invasion. Within months, Britain had to choose between continued resistance and negotiation. In this altered timeline, pragmatism prevailed over heroism. Britain sought terms to avoid a catastrophic invasion and further civilian casualties. Germany imposed conditions, but refrained from demanding territorial acquisitions beyond Europe or Britain's colonial holdings. This strategic restraint allowed Germany to consolidate control without overextending itself, stabilizing the Western Front and ensuring a foundation for future campaigns. With Britain subdued, Germany reopened vital trade routes across the Atlantic. Naval blockades were lifted, allowing the transport of essential resources such as oil, rubber, metals, and industrial machinery. These imports revitalized German industry and reinforced its military capabilities. Ports across Europe were busy with cargo ships delivering goods critical to the war effort. The economy stabilized, enabling Germany to focus on eastern expansion. Occupied nations contributed labor and resources to the Reich, while local administrations were reorganized to serve German interests. Economic recovery in France, though under strict supervision, provided additional support for industrial and military operations. By controlling commerce, Germany ensured that the momentum of its early victories would not be lost. Germany's early air assaults on Britain were strategically targeted. The Luftwaffe neutralized radar installations and weakened airfields, crippling Britain's ability to detect incoming raids. By achieving air superiority over the English Channel, Germany prepared the ground for a potential invasion. Bombing campaigns focused on military targets and infrastructure, leaving civilian areas secondary but still impacted by the chaos of war. The effectiveness of this strategy lay in its timing. Britain, still reorganizing after earlier defeats, could not mount a coherent defense. By the time reinforcements and reinvigorated squadrons arrived, the strategic advantage had already shifted decisively to Germany. Germany had amassed an invasion fleet at Calais and Rotterdam, consisting of transports, cargo ships, and naval escorts. Plans for crossing the Channel were meticulous, relying on control of the air and sea. In this alternate timeline, British leadership, recognizing the futility of further resistance, opted to negotiate. Lord Halifax, newly appointed Prime Minister, announced terms to prevent mass civilian casualties and infrastructure destruction. Britain surrendered without ceding its colonies or territory, preserving its global reach but remaining neutral in European conflicts. The choice allowed Germany to redirect resources eastward, consolidating power without the distraction of prolonged occupation or guerrilla resistance in Britain. With Western Europe under control, Germany strengthened administrative and military structures. Trade resumed, resources flowed freely, and local populations adapted to new governance. Occupied France, the Low Countries, and Scandinavia were reorganized under puppet governments loyal to Berlin. Economic recovery in these regions enabled Germany to extract vital raw materials and maintain industrial output. Cultural and social programs were adjusted to align with German policies. Education emphasized loyalty and discipline, while propaganda reinforced the Reich's ideology. Resistance movements were minimal, suppressed quickly through efficient policing and surveillance. The Western Front became a stable base from which Germany could project power eastward. In the summer of 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest land invasion in history. Over 4 million soldiers, supported by hundreds of thousands of vehicles and aircraft, advanced into Soviet territory. The speed and coordination of the German offensive overwhelmed local defenses. Moscow, Leningrad, and key industrial centers fell within months. Occupation of Ukraine and Belarus secured critical agricultural and industrial resources. Millions of prisoners were captured, and vital supply lines were redirected to support the ongoing campaign. The Soviet Union, facing coordinated attacks from both the West and East, struggled to mount effective resistance. German forces concentrated fully on a single front, achieving success through sheer numerical and technological superiority. Simultaneously, Japan launched offensives from the east, targeting Siberia and resource-rich regions of Asia. Japanese forces rapidly captured territories in Southeast Asia, securing oil, rubber, and metals essential for prolonged military campaigns. Coordination between Germany and Japan created a unified front, ensuring that Axis powers dominated both European and Asian theaters. The cooperation allowed for efficient allocation of resources and prevented distractions from competing interests. Axis military strategy emphasized synchronization, logistical support, and shared intelligence, giving them a decisive edge over isolated Allied resistance. By 1942, Axis powers controlled vast territories across Europe, Asia, and Africa. Puppet governments enforced compliance, and propaganda promoted loyalty to the regime. Education systems were reshaped to reflect the ideology of the state, while cultural institutions reinforced obedience and conformity. Resistance was systematically suppressed, ensuring stability and compliance across occupied regions. Infrastructure projects, industrial production, and resource extraction proceeded without interference. Populations adapted to new laws, hierarchies, and expectations. Daily life revolved around state directives, and citizens were expected to contribute to the collective power of the Reich or the Empire. Life under Axis rule was highly regimented. Social hierarchies were strictly enforced, with privileges and responsibilities determined by ideological criteria. Citizens were indoctrinated from childhood, and loyalty to the state was rewarded. Education, media, and public messaging emphasized obedience, discipline, and the supremacy of the ruling regime. Individual freedoms were limited. Cultural expression was regulated, and dissent carried serious consequences. Compliance ensured safety, while resistance risked punishment or re-education. Generations grew up immersed in the ideology of the state, internalizing loyalty as a fundamental aspect of identity. Across the Atlantic, the United States, led by President Wendell Willkie, remained largely isolationist. Industrial growth continued domestically, but the nation avoided involvement in the global conflict. Without American intervention, Germany and Japan expanded unchallenged. The lack of U.S. engagement allowed Axis powers to consolidate power, secure resources, and project military strength globally. Diplomatic efforts were calculated to prevent escalation while maintaining dominance. The United States focused on domestic development and strategic preparedness rather than active intervention. Germany and Japan invested heavily in military research and technological development. Missile programs, early nuclear research, and advanced aerospace engineering progressed rapidly. These innovations enhanced the ability to control vast territories and deter opposition. Technological superiority provided a significant advantage over potential adversaries. Advanced weaponry, surveillance systems, and industrial automation ensured the efficiency and dominance of Axis-controlled regions. Scientific efforts were directed exclusively towards sustaining the power and influence of the regime. By the 1950s, Axis powers controlled Europe, Asia, and parts of Africa. Puppet governments managed occupied territories, while local populations adapted to enforced social hierarchies. Propaganda and education reinforced loyalty, creating a generation fully aligned with the state's ideology. Economic stability, technological innovation, and strategic coordination ensured long-term control. Resistance was fragmented and easily contained. Germany and Japan had effectively neutralized potential threats, establishing a global balance of power centered on Axis dominance. The world had changed irreversibly. Europe, Asia, and Africa were under Axis control. Social, economic, and political systems revolved around the imperatives of the state. Education, media, and governance emphasized conformity and obedience. Borders were secured, resources exploited, and populations indoctrinated. Humanity adapted to a new reality where freedom was constrained and loyalty to the ruling regimes defined identity. The Axis powers maintained supremacy through calculated governance, technological advancement, and unwavering enforcement of ideological principles. Over the decades, Axis influence shaped culture, technology, and international relations. The global economy centered on resources and policies dictated by the regimes. Scientific advancements continued under state control, emphasizing military and industrial applications. Society evolved under strict regulation, with new generations growing up fully aligned with the ideology of their rulers. Resistance movements persisted, but were marginal and swiftly suppressed. Axis policies determined the trajectory of nations, shaping the modern world into a reflection of these alternate victories. Despite apparent stability, pockets of resistance emerged worldwide. Secret networks communicated covertly, spreading ideas of freedom and unity. Underground movements in Europe, Asia, and the Americas sought to undermine Axis control. Tensions simmered as occupied nations waited for opportunities to regain autonomy. Diplomatic conflicts, economic pressures, and covert actions defined international relations. The struggle for influence continued, demonstrating that no regime could fully suppress human aspiration for freedom. By the late 20th century, Axis powers harnessed technological progress to solidify control. Communication networks, transportation, and industrial automation were optimized for efficiency and oversight. Surveillance and intelligence operations became integral to maintaining order. Education and media ensured ideological consistency across generations. Science and technology advanced rapidly, but innovation remained guided by the priorities of the state. Society was tightly managed, with human behavior aligned to reinforce the existing hierarchy. Axis powers coordinated global strategy between Europe and Asia. Japan maintained control over East Asia, Southeast Asia, and parts of the Pacific. Germany dominated Europe, Northern Africa, and resource-rich regions of the Soviet territories. International relations revolved around enforcing loyalty, controlling resources, and deterring rebellion. States outside Axis control faced diplomatic isolation and economic constraints. The world order reflected a carefully maintained balance of power centered on Axis supremacy. Every aspect of life was shaped by state ideology. Education, media, and social institutions reinforced compliance and loyalty. Cultural expression was restricted to forms sanctioned by the regime. Citizens internalized the principles of hierarchy, duty, and obedience. Dissent was minimal, discouraged by surveillance, propaganda, and social pressure. Populations were indoctrinated to view the regime as legitimate and protective. Generations grew up unaware of alternative perspectives or histories, ensuring continuity of power. In this rewritten timeline, humanity lived under Axis rule for decades. Scientific advancement, economic management, and social engineering maintained stability. Resistance existed, but remained fragmented. The world became a reflection of the priorities, ideology, and strategic planning of its rulers. Global order was shaped by centralized power, technological advantage, and enforced conformity. The story of this alternate world reminds us that history is fragile, and a single decision can alter the fate of nations. It challenges our understanding of freedom, power, and human resilience, asking how societies would evolve under a regime that never fell. In imagining this world, we confront the consequences of absolute power, the limits of human resistance, and the enduring drive for autonomy. Even in the darkest timelines, the human spirit seeks a way to endure and reclaim liberty.